My name is Susanne Evans and welcome to the ChangeStories podcast. This is a podcast for people who are interested in creating change, whether that is within organisations or for individuals. In each podcast episode, I will have a conversation with someone about their work to share their story. Each story and conversation will provide you with ideas and inspiration for your own organisation or for you personally. To find out more about each episode, including further reading, and to share your change stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk. Hello everyone and welcome. So today I've got my lovely friends and colleagues David Lee and Susanne Chríodáin with me for one of our regular conversations. And today we are going to be talking about burnout. So this came as a result of a number of conversations that we had, not just about personal experiences and things that we've heard about from other people, but also because we felt we were starting to see a lot more conversations about burnout in our various platforms and social media that we are involved in. So we thought it might be an interesting thing to talk about. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's first of all take a bit of a deep dive into what burnout actually is, what our understanding of it is from the outside and also the inside. So David, I'm going to go over to you first. Would you define burnout if you had to explain it to somebody?
Yeah, speaking from personal experience, like feeling exhausted and loss of interest in what before was something I was really passionate about. So a feeling of going through the motions. And I remember, like it was yesterday and it was a long time ago, I was doing a workshop and I can't remember what the topic was. And I said something like, the majority of people in America live for the weekend. And as I said that, I thought, oh my God, I'm now part of that majority. And I was sort of like the last one to know until I said it. Those are a few things that come to mind, especially the exhaustion. Like there's no energy, no mojo to do anything, be curious, be creative, really care, etc.
And that is obviously a really different way for you of being, because my experience of you is that's not you. So that obviously was very different for you. Is that something that resonates with you, Susanne?
Yes. And like David, it's quite a long time ago that I went through what I only realized long after was called burnout. I mean, at the time I had no idea what was going on. And I think for me, there was perhaps a loss of identity mostly. I just didn't, I was a bit listless and without a purpose, I think, perhaps, but not conscious of that. And I also had a really tough year. There was a lot of things going on in my life, but it manifested in just complete exhaustion. And I was doing a course at the time, I remember, and it's funny how something stays with you, isn't it, Dave? It's something that somebody says, there was this somebody talking about how to spend a good day or how to get stress relief or something like that. I can't remember the topic exactly, but they, asked us in the group what we do to relieve stress at times. And the thing I remember thinking about was chopping vegetables. And I still do. I still find that quite, because you have to think about it. So it focuses your mind. It's very good to use your hands and stuff like that. But after that class seminar, I began to cry because something, I don't know if that's what tipped me over the edge, but I just began to cry. And I cried that whole night pretty much and into the next day. And I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what was going on. I was we talk about being grounded and feeling grounded. There was no ground, I think is the best way of describing it. And I remember I sent an email to the head of HR and said, look, there's something wrong. And clearly, I don't know what's going on. And they said, you can go and talk to somebody. So I went and sat in front of a counselor, and like it was a week or two later, perhaps, by the time I got an appointment. And it was a horrible experience. This person just did not help in any way, shape, or form. Um, and, I think the relationship means so much in anything like that. All that person seemed to want to do was to line me up for the next conversation. And I remember coming out of there, and I walked for about 4 miles after that session, and I was so lost. But I remember just having this sense of, I have to find myself. Now, it was a really long way back, and I'm sure that I got back into doing things. I took time off and all of that before I was ready, because I did it all alone. And it took me a really long time to be able to talk about this without crying, without my whole body kind of going into a state of shock almost. But I remember people saying to me afterwards, we knew there was something wrong. We didn't know what to do. And I think I've read about that since, that one of the things we do as humans when we most need other people is when we push them away most, and it's very hard to break in. And I would say that is probably a very strong sign on the outside of burnout, when there is someone that won't let you in, that usually does, or you can't tell what's wrong with them. And, a couple of people tried, and I can remember just like, because I didn't know what was happening. And that was my only way of protecting myself, I guess, at the time. The one, I know we'll probably come back to this later, but the one benefit of all of that, I would say, from my perspective now, is my body never, ever let that happen again. So anytime that I was in a stressed state at work, or things were getting to be too much, and, when we start using those two words, I would get sick. So my body would stop me prior to that whole going down that slippery slope into nothingness. And I don't think I've spoken about this like this before, actually. And I didn't write about it in my book even, because I still don't know really where it came from. I have ideas, and I don't know that I have the words always to describe the experience. So thank you for letting me attempt that here today.
I'm curious. I think it could be really helpful to people if you're able to like revisit the HR person not being helpful. Do you?
Sorry, it was the counselor, the HR
I'm sorry.
person.
Oh, I'm sorry, the counselor. Yeah. Do you remember what's like some of the specifics of what she did that wasn't helpful and what could have been helpful? So like for people who want to be helpful to in this case, it was a client, but a loved one.
I remember I went in and I sat down, and I can't remember what she asked me first, but I just started crying because I didn't know what was going on otherwise. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, you're very tearful, aren't you?" It's like, oh my God, what is wrong with this person? Like, really? And then she kept, there was a clock behind me, and she kept looking at her clock. Like, she kept glancing at her clock. And I really felt like she was not listening to me at all. That's what I remember, David. I don't remember anything else about the conversation. I just remember her trying to, every time I say something, she'd say, "Well, we'll pick that up another time." So I felt very dismissed of my experience, not really able to just talk or cry or whatever I needed to do, express myself, and being kind of pushed along. And that was a sense for me. Now, again, I think a relationship is so important. So if that wasn't the right person, now I would have gone and found somebody else. But at the time, there was kind of stigma as well associated with it. I didn't really tell anyone that I had gone to talk to somebody it was all a bit hush hush under the radar, and there wasn't much choice either. You know, people weren't talking about mental health. You know, I would say this is probably 20 years ago now. So it's quite a while ago. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing that, but particularly for you, Susan, if that's the first time you've spoken about some of these things. I think it's really interesting, and it's interesting. I'm glad you told the point about people noticed, because that was going to be my question about, for both of your cases, did people notice, and what did they try and do? And I guess that's from two perspectives, really. One is, how can you know if someone is going through this? So if people are listening, how can they know? But also, how can they help? And I think that leads on to what you've just been talking about, Susan, which is listening, isn't it?
Mm. And what about you, Suzanne? You know, have you had a similar experience, or have you witnessed somebody as well?
I would say for me, it's been never total burnout. I certainly don't think that's happened for me. I think I've edged close to it on a couple of occasions, and I've managed to escape. So I think when I was doing my PhD, I reached a point with it where I fell out of love with doing it totally, wasn't interested. And I was overwhelmed with work and family life, not anything in particular. It was just too much to do. I couldn't have put my finger on what the issue was really, but it just overwhelming. And I took the decision to stop. And I took a leave of absence for a year from my studies and just focused on everything else. I didn't even look at any work that I'd done. I put it in a cupboard and shut the door on it for a year. And that for me was my own decision to do. But it felt awful, because it was the first time I'd ever walked away from anything. It felt like utter failure, because I just thought, I can't do this anymore. And if I don't stop, something's going to happen. That was kind of the feeling that I had. So I walked away from it. I had no contact with anyone at my university for a year, and I just carried on living my life like a normal person, and it was fine. And I did go back to it, but the first day I walked in, and met my supervisors again, they both said, we didn't think we'd see you again. We thought that would be the end, because they could tell that I was finding it so difficult. So, but during that time, I got some support, and I went and I saw a coach, and we did a lot of work together, and she was the one who helped me understand all of the things that have been going on for me, and gave me the ability to get back on the horse, so to speak. And so that was invaluable. And then the second time is actually more recent. So I think after my book was published, I've started to struggle again. And I've spoken to you about this before, but finding it impossible to switch off. And I could feel it, that kind of stress, and kind of, I can't stop coming back. That sort of feeling of everything's urgent. I've got to deal with everything straight away. I feel overwhelmed by all of this stuff. And when I did stop, I took an extended break over Christmas last year. I found it really difficult to just stop. And I thought, I'm really glad that I have stopped and that I can just rest, so that by the time I came back to work 3 weeks later, I did feel a lot better. But I was really interested in what you said, Susan, about your health and how your body kind of stops you. So I suffer from migraines, and my migraines are stress related. And I know when I start getting a string of them, that's my body telling me something's not right and you need to stop. And as I've got older, I've got a lot better at dealing with that. And I have treatment. So I have acupuncture for my migraines, which makes the world of difference. Anyone listening who gets migraines, please investigate acupuncture. But I also think I'm just better at recognizing when I'm starting to go down that slope. So I start waking up in the morning with a feeling of like existential dread, like I'm dreading the week ahead. That's a sign that I need to just relax a bit and get some treatment. So, but I used to have IBS. So 20, 30 years ago, when I first started work, I had IBS. And I think that was also me being very stressed, working long hours. And again, my body was telling me to stop, but I didn't take any notice. So, but now I do. So I just think as I've got older, I recognize that feeling, and my body tells me, enough already, Suzanne, come on, you need to take a break. So yeah, over Christmas, loads of migraines. So yeah, it was inevitable, I think.
It's interesting when you talk about, Suzanne, about intentionally taking the year off, and then both of you about your body's letting you know it's time to like turn off right now. It makes me think of like one of the most useful concepts I've ever come across in terms of resilience. And I had forgotten that the origin of it was with burnt out senior executives was Dr. James Loehr, Loehr, and Tony Schwartz's work. They published in 2001 in Harvard Business Review, working with a corporate athlete model. And their work in helping burnt out like C-suite executives get their mojo back, the model for it was based on their work with elite athletes who were burnt out, and realizing the first step in their recovery was literally recovery, and doing the challenge recovery cycle and gradually increasing the challenge and making sure there's commensurate recovery. And so, and so one of the terms they talk about, or talked about, was the sine wave oscillation, and how human energy systems oscillate, just like breathe in, breathe out, wake, sleep, etc. And over the years, what I've been really conscious of is like, how do you embed in throughout the day those little recovery moments so we don't have to crash physically and, be out of commission? And then, like, how do we design those into the week, etc. So, yeah.
And I do think that we'll probably come on to this in a bit more as we talk about it, but modern life in particular, post-pandemic life, of that constant Zoom calls, rushing from one to the other, because we don't have to go anywhere. You can overschedule yourself to a ridiculous degree. I had a day a couple of weeks ago when I had 10 meetings in a day. I mean, that's just insane. I know. Because I am the worst for diary management. So, part of that's my own fault. But, I had a day last week when I started at 7 in the morning because I was doing something with someone in Australia, and I finished at 7 o'clock at night because I was doing something with someone in the States. So but you can do it because you don't have to travel. And I was listening to something earlier on today, actually, about how there's that constant cortisol up and down because you're rushing to go from one thing to the next, which can just lead your body into this constant state of fight or flight. Everything's urgent. Is that something you've experienced? Do you think these things are getting worse, or is it just me?
Some of the words we use, like overwhelm and too much and all of these things, I think when anything becomes too or over, there's a very good clue in that for us. And yet, what do we do to make it? I was talking to somebody about this recently. There's no whelm word. It's over under.
Underwhelm.
Over or under, It's like, how do we whelm ourselves? Like, because the extremes, too much of anything or too little of anything, there's great wisdom in that phrase, everything in moderation. And we're not really geared towards moderation, perhaps because it doesn't give us that buzz or that adrenaline. There's an amazing TED talk, a TEDx, I'm not sure if it's TED or TEDx talk, about the brain under stress. And it's Professor Lara Boyd. And she says, because obviously every time there's adrenaline, the chemicals are getting released, or whatever is getting released into our brain, and it fills up. And if it's a constant thing, when you've expended the energy, if they're not matched, the level of the chemical and the energy, then there's excess chemical, and it has to find a place to go. and there isn't really room for it to go anywhere. So it starts to do other things to your body budget. I mean, that's a very layperson's way of explaining it. But the analogy or metaphor she uses, which I think is fantastic, she said, imagine you're going to a car park and it's a really busy car park. And you drive around for ages looking for a place to park because you just can't find an empty spot. That's what it's like when your brain is trying to work with the too much adrenaline in it. So there's no room for a new idea. There's no room to think about a new way of doing anything or anything like that. It's just constant driving around looking like for a space. You don't even think I should go to another car park because you can't. And I think that's a really simple way of thinking about the stress. But that wasn't the question you asked at all, Susanne. But I think the thing is, everything's relative, was what I was going to say. So 20 years ago, we didn't have this always on culture that we have now. However, I was working overseas in some quite remote locations. I responded to an emergency. I responded like to the tsunami in Sri Lanka and then the earthquake in Pakistan later that year. And I was in a situation where there was like, we were the police broke into our compound, the police, to collect tax and basically held us hostage for a day while they negotiated things. And so there was a lot of events that had happened. And I think all of those put us into, that fight or flight. And we didn't talk about things like that then. So I think we've got a lot more knowledge now, common knowledge perhaps, or it's talked about better to help us deal with things. However, we're the converted sitting here chatting to each other. I'm sure that there are still lots of people out there that haven't come across the fact that there are ways of dealing with this, or that burnout isn't normal, or that overwhelm. But I think overwhelm can come from anywhere. I think it's a human condition. And I guess it's relative. It's relative to the situation that you find yourself in the time. And you don't have to be always on in a workplace for that to happen. You just have to be always on for that to happen. And that can come from so many places in your life. And I think our nervous system, if we're constantly in that fight or flight mode anyway, our nervous system doesn't know how to relax. It can't, because it just doesn't know how to, because it thinks once we start to relax that we're in danger. So we better perk back up again. So I think we can keep ourselves in overwhelm unknowingly, and then it becomes normal.
Mm.
And actually, you're just getting closer to burnout all the time. I think that kind of answers your question.
It does. And actually, there's a book that was recommended to me a while ago. It's called Rushing Woman Syndrome. I don't know whether you've heard of it, but it's basically for women, midlife women who are in exactly that situation. So where running around has become normal and they don't know how to stop. And someone talked to me about it, and I recognize it so much from my own experiences, but also the experiences of a lot of women and men that I know, that it's normal now to be like that, isn't it? That's the issue.
That is the issue, Susanne. And that's why we're seeing more of perhaps it being talked about as well, because it's great that the stigma is lifted, but actually, are we doing something to help people? I think that's the thing.
I wondered on your views about that, David, because one of the things I was thinking about prior to this conversation is that idea that it's being talked about more, which is good. But is it good? Is it good that we're talking about it, or are we actually doing anything with what we're talking about?
Yeah, man, great question. One of the things in terms of talking more about it, that just popped into my mind was some of the recent conversations with managers complaining about the new generation of workers, actually. but anyway, I'll say what the complaint is and then why I think it's great. Um, about so the complaint being the new generation of workers, they're not willing to work these ungodly hours. Their number one concern is work-life balance. And I'm thinking, bully for them. Like, that's that's smart. And even though in the short term, I get it why a manager or employer wants somebody to, work unreasonable hours, devote their whole life to them, in a very selfish way. That makes sense. In the long run, obviously, it's not sustainable. And then the bigger picture, the cost to society with, um, the fallout of burnt out people, besides the healthcare implications, the family, the family implications. So I think it's great that there's more talked about and pushback. I remember when I first got into the resilience field, and it was so frustrating because employers acted like they were on the cutting edge if they hosted a brown bag lunch talk on stress management techniques, which invariably were like deep breathing and meditation and not much else. And thinking like, okay, good, check that box. We've addressed stress in the workplace. Like, oh, exactly.
I think there are so many of those narratives that still circulate about long hours, and it's almost like a badge of honor. I recognize it so much from my early days in consulting. Back in the day when I was a graduate, we worked ridiculous hours, on a regular basis. But it was seen as a good thing. It was proving yourself. And if you wanted to get on, you had to work the ridiculous hours. So there was a certain kudos to having had to be taxied home at 2 a.m. because it was too late for you to get public transport, and then turning up the next day at 9 o'clock ready to start work. Even more kudos if you hadn't actually been home and you had to pop out in the morning to buy some new clothes to put on. These were seen as good things, and you went along with it because that's what you thought you had to do to get on. And I think it's great that younger employees are not buying into that. I think the problem is a lot of the managers of these people will be people of our age who did have to go through that. And then there's resentment about, well, I had to do that. And that's how I learned to do all the things that I learned to do. So how are you going to learn how to do these things if you don't? Well, how do you show commitment? And I think there's that tension which hasn't yet been resolved. I don't know what your experience of it is, but I don't think we've quite squared that circle yet.
Yeah, I wonder if it'll end up being simply an age out of the
Yes.
workplace. Because yeah, a version of that I just experienced last week, um, were several managers in a seminar talking about how, quote, soft the new generation was. And soft meant, hey, when I was coming up in this industry, you were yelled at all the time and you just dealt with it. And I'm like, and I'm thinking your point is like, that was a good thing, you know? So I really wonder, because I definitely agree that there's a jealousy and a resentment, like, hey, how come I had to deal with that and you're not wanting to, or you don't have to?
Yeah, and I think possibly a lack of recognition at how damaging that is, that it's not good to have had to have experienced that, to be shouted at, to be expected to work all the time, to miss Christmas. I mean, all these things happen to me and people I know because of work. That's not a good thing. We shouldn't be wanting to perpetuate it. It's good that that's in the past. We shouldn't be expecting people to still do it.
Yeah, one of my beliefs is the like the psychological processes that have to take place to endure that type of workplace and work experience, it so numbs a person out. It's like the only way you can survive that is to be numbed out and pretend to yourself that that's no biggie. And so you get to the point, the saying, you believe your own press, get to the point where you actually believe that craziness. So, and then I think Susan, you and I have talked about this, kind of a corollary to that is like the super alpha male hard charger who rises through the ranks and took a lot of crap rising up in order to rise up, and dismiss how humiliating that was. Like, oh no, that's no biggie. It didn't bother me. That's just guys being guys, because that's the only way to resolve the cognitive dissonance of allowing yourself to be treated that way. You convince yourself it's no biggie. And so you're so emotionally out of touch with yourself, you can't help but be emotionally out of touch with your impact on others and other people's distress.
Yeah, and you're going to work from here up. You are, you have completely disconnected yourself from your body and the sensations that happen inside of yourself. Like, they're just dismissed. They're not coming to, and you've normalized stuff. Like, that's what you're saying, really, isn't it? If you numb things out, or the behavior you've just seen, or like you said, Susanne, 2 o'clock in the morning, taxi, back in at 9 o'clock, it was normal.
Yeah, well, everyone did it.
Yeah, and like, you kind of, got a pat in the back or whatever. So it was like a rite of passage. And you didn't question, I mean, maybe you did question it. Some people had enough self-awareness at a young age to question things. I mean, I think that's what happens is, if you're not self-aware, you're just blaming others for how they're doing things or whatever. And it takes you a while to look at, well, what's my role in all of this? And what have I put up with that I didn't need to put up with? Or how could I have been a better boss had I understood how to get the best from people in a way that wasn't shouting at them or whatever? That kind of, it's one of the things that I find really fascinating is, I don't know how much money is spent every year. Like, it's a lot of money on leadership development and managing managers and blah, 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 blah. And yet we seem to get no further along. I mean, I'm sure we are, but are we?
I think for me, the issue is the model of leadership which exists is not right. So it doesn't, there's so much of that kind of leader as hero, leader as kind of, as a battle, all of this kind of tropes around leadership. What I don't think we have is a form of leadership that's recognized as universally good, which escaped from some of those old-fashioned ways of being. And I think you're right, David. I almost feel like there needs to be a changing of the guard in the workforce and in leadership, because so many people, and I include myself in this, because I came up through organizations with that model. It's hard to step away from that as an approach of leadership, because that's what you're taught. I see it in my work all the time when I'm trying to work with leaders and get them to be more authentic and more vulnerable and tell a story. And they're like clinging on to their PowerPoint like it's the life support machine. I just want to go and do a town hall presentation, Susanne. And I'll say, no, just throw away the PowerPoint, just stand up and talk. And they don't want to do it because it scares them. And the model of leadership that they've seen is not that. It's the long hours. You pull yourself up through commitment and productivity and resilience in the face of difficulties, etc., etc. That's the narrative that we're told, I think. I don't know, do you agree? Is that what you've experienced too?
So a few things come to mind. So absolutely, um, the hey, that's what I had to deal with, and like it worked for me, I'm okay, kind of mentality. I One of the other things though that comes up for me that helps me step away from some of my judgmentalness at times, specifically around the almost universal unwillingness to have the hard conversations in the workplace. And so, kind of like a corollary to what you're saying, Susanne, is the leader afraid of being vulnerable. It is um, the amount of woundedness in the average person that gets projected onto people and vomited out in interactions. Um, I get why that leads to leaders not wanting to be vulnerable or have the conversations or open up Pandora's box. It's like, I don't think I have the skills to handle what might come back. So it's interesting because you're bringing this up made me flash back to something that a psychologist friend said to me 20 years ago when he was asking about the work that I did. And he goes something like, do you really think management development, leadership development really makes a difference if those people haven't done their work? And I'm like, good point. you know? And just a quick example that I'm flashing on that I remember doing some consulting in an organization where the new leader, who's a great leader, took over from a 30-year tyrant. And the organization was like Stockholm syndrome, et cetera, and dealing with this guy. This guy was so unself-aware that when he passed the baton to the new leader, he gave him a copy of the book Nuts, which was by was it Bill Kelleher, the founder of Southwest Airlines. And he was an amazingly authentic leader, created a great culture. And the guy hands the book. He goes, I modeled my leadership after this. This has been so good. I think you should read it. So, like, totally out of touch.
That is amazing. That is amazing because tomorrow's World Book Day, and I was trying to come up with a post about books and the things that are left unsaid, but clearly sometimes things need to be spelt out properly. It's not for you to fill in your own version of how this is meant to play out.
Oh, well, it links into our previous conversation, doesn't it, about difficult people? And a big part of that conversation was having that level of self-awareness of yourself and your impact on others is key to this as well. So I guess as a leader, it's being able to reflect upon the people around you and noticing how they are, but also noticing how you are with everyone else.
And if I could just jump onto that for 1 second, and this is really fresh on my mind because I had some interactions that I alluded to before we started recording that it really make me thinking about doing some writing, specifically around that. And when you said about like looking at your impact on others, and one of the things that I've witnessed a few times that really stood out for me, and this is actually not related to leaders, but just fellow humans, is when somebody has a lot of shame about who they are, it's so incredibly painful to acknowledge where you're really like not okay and like being rude, toxic, a jerk, etc., to acknowledge that, or let's say a lesser version, is so like painful at the soul level that is like no way can they either hear that feedback or self-reflect. But it's like, if you can do the work to where you realize we all have light and shadow, we all have good stuff and not so great stuff, like join the human race, then we're willing to say, like, man, I've been kind of disrespectful to the people that report to me. Am I yelling at them? Isn't me being a tough leader. It's me just being a really rude, disrespectful jerk, and it's not okay. So I'm going to have to work on that.
Mm. I read something earlier today, which I actually shared with both of you. So it was an article from The Guardian, which Helena Clayton shared on parental burnout. And it was pointing to the root of that is this perfectionism. So this desire for everything to be perfect in one's life. So, you know, you have to be the perfect parent, you have to be the perfect employee, you have to be the perfect wife, husband, brother, sister, whatever. And all of this builds up impossible standards for people to live to. And something like social media just contributes to that even more, because then you see everyone else's perfect life. You know, comparison is the thief of joy and all that. That it just builds up the pressure, and it really struck me, that article, because I've always prided myself on not being a perfectionist. You know, I have no attention to detail, so you know, I get bored easily and all of that. So I'm not a perfectionist, but I've thought for quite a long time that perfectionism is at the root of so much stress that people experience. And in this article, it actually said a key thing that you can do to reduce burnout in yourself is to lower your standards, which I thought was quite interesting. That actually, if you're more satisfied with less perfectionism, your life will be a lot less stressful. I thought that was quite interesting. I don't know. I don't think either of you are recovering perfectionists. I'm not sure.
No, but I do have very high standards with things, you know. I mean, I'm sure everybody does. That's the thing. There are certain things that we will have hold ourselves to a very high standard. And that can be self-defeating for sure. And I think can cause a lot of stress if you haven't shared the standard with the person that you're expecting to work to the standard. And I think that's often the mismatch of expectations that you find in a workplace, that I ask you to do something for me, and what I expect back and what you give me back may be very, very far apart. And both are at fault in one way. One of us for not checking what it is you really wanted from me, and the other one of us from not showing you what I really wanted. You know, I think that causes a lot of unnecessary stress, actually, in our workplaces, that our language in business, the words that we use tend to be very vague. And there's a lot to be said for precision. And this isn't precision to be perfectionist, but precision about what is it that you actually want me to do, and how would you like it to look, and when do you need it by? These kind of things that we tend to just talk around. And I bet you that people spend a lot of time wondering, should I just do it a little bit better so I meet the perceived standard? And it can still be very far off. So I think there's something in that. I think perfectionism, sure, I think that drives a lot of people like very, very far into stress. I think mismatched expectations, though, about standards. Yeah. And I even remember being with a team, and the team leader kept saying to them, good enough is what I want from you. But the team leader didn't give them any idea of what good enough meant. And it was really interesting because for that person, they were like, well, good enough. It just needs to be good enough. But of course, good enough in their head was totally different from what good enough in everyone else's heads was. And that's the other thing is we all have such a different perspective. We don't share perspectives. And while we share a language, if we're not precise about the language we're using, then we don't know what the perspectives are. And that's what I think causes a lot of angst in our workplaces.
I think that's so true. I find myself saying a lot, success, not perfection, to clients, but what does that mean? I need to be able to describe what success looks like. So actually going back to the conversation we had earlier about leadership, there's that noticing, but there's also being precise about expectations and being clear about feedback. I think another thing that's really stressful for people is someone not giving them clear feedback. Going back to your point, David, about courageous conversations, we need to be courageous in that when we need to feedback to somebody that they're not giving us what we want.
Man, so true. I think the two biggest skill gaps that I've seen over the years, in general with people, but we're talking about leadership specifically, is one, creating psychological safety so people with less power are willing to speak up. And then number two is speaking with clarity and specificity around giving feedback, setting expectations and giving feedback. So absolutely. And that's one of the things I'll say when I'm working with managers is two of your best friends, if you want to be a good manager, are so for instance or so for example, and then give an example, give a specific example, or tell a short story about what you mean by good enough, or showing initiative, or being a good team player. Man, I'm so on board with what you're saying there. Yeah.
So there's a big role for leadership and managers here in leading in the right way and noticing how their team are doing. But if we suspect, or if someone listening to this suspects that someone close to them or a colleague is burning out or is on the edge of it, what should they do? How do they support that person? Susan, what do you think based on your experiences? Not just for you, but what you've seen, maybe.
Oh, yeah. And I think the thing you somehow have to get that person to open up if you suspect there's something. And that might be actually talking to somebody else who you think might be better as relationship with them. Not necessarily talking behind their backs, but like going to somebody saying, hey, have you noticed that Susan is blah, blah, blah these days? And can you have a word with her? Now, I think it's also, I suppose it depends. Some people will like a very direct approach, like, what's going on? And other people might just prefer to say, I noticed last week, normally you would do this when this happens, but this time you reacted in such and such a way, or you didn't come with us to lunch or whatever. Is there a reason for that? And I think it's trying to have an open-ended question without being accusatory. Because I can remember that's what people were saying to me, was like, it was more, you're working too hard or something. It's so obvious. Like, of course I am. What the hell is wrong with you? You're kind of saying things to people that they already know. It's already going on your head. I'm working too hard. Yeah. Like, that's not helpful. But, it's kind of coming at it from how can I help? How can I support you? Can I take something off your plate? Is there something going on for you that you'd like to talk about? If you don't want to talk to me, is there someone else you could talk to? Because I can remember seeing somebody who I worked with and I didn't know well, but I absolutely saw in that person what I had gone through several years later. You know, I could just like the way they reacted to things. I was almost like watching a mirror of myself. And I did tell their line manager, I said, look, you know, it's not my place to have this conversation. I don't know this person well enough, but you need to look out for them because there's something not quite right here. Now, I don't know what happened. I left the organization shortly after that. But I think it's finding the person that you know is the other person's person, because there's always someone in the workplace. And if it's you, you know, if you listen to our stories today, and you start to think, oh, there's something going on for me, take action, do something for you, do something that reminds you, I think, of who you are is really important. Get outside. I think that's a good place to start. Take a week off. That's a good place to start. But do things to start to recharge your battery, not what anyone else tells you to do, but the things that you know bring you some joy or that give you a spark in your eyes, that twinkle. And I think once you can start finding your way back to yourself, if you can't find that twinkle or spark, then seek out help. Absolutely seek out help. And whether that's with a coach or a counselor or a psychiatrist or psychologist or your GP or somebody. And the thing is, don't let it go too far because it is a really long way back. It is a really long way back. And yeah, so take action.
Thank you. What about you, David? What things have you learnt in terms of support that you would have liked or support that you've given to other people? What do you think worked? Anything else?
Before I jump into it, I just wanted to respond to some of the really cool stuff you just said, Susan. So last thing you mentioned about don't let it go too far. There's a famous book in the trauma field called The Body Knows This, was it Body Keeps the Score? Yeah. And the realize it's so important thing for people to realize your body will shut you down if you don't do it first. So better to address this sooner rather than later. Also, it's cool that you mentioned about go outside. I just YouTube just served up a video where this guy was talking about how foliage reflects infrared rays. And because of that, and I can't remember the study, but because of that, when you're walking in green environments versus like city, you get restored faster because of that. And I'm sure there's other mysterious stuff going on besides that. But anyway, yeah, nothing like going out in nature. Yeah, just everything that Susan said, I'm just like, yeah, check, check, check. And what I try to do is have that balance of like being invitational. So like, everything okay? You don't seem like your typical self, blah, blah, blah. And also not badgering the person. So if I get either they're directly letting me know, don't want to talk about it, or I just get the feeling, then it's like, hey, that's cool. But if you ever want to, like, I'm here for you. So that balancing. And I think maybe the only other thing that comes to mind, and it's been like a theme that we've been talking about before, back to authenticity and self-disclosure, is how maybe like for the listener sharing their own example of feeling burnt out and why that makes them concerned about them, it can help take away the weirdness of like admitting that this is going on. And then actually one other thing, when Susan you were talking about not sounding like you're judging them. And I think that's also if we're concerned that the person will misperceive why we're bringing it up. Like, it's not because you're no longer a fun person to be around that I'm, calling you out kind of thing. It's just state your intention and your non-intention. Like, I'm not bringing this up like because you're a drag to be around or I'm trying to criticize you. It's like, I'm concerned because you're awesome and I want to make sure you're okay. So that's all I got to say for now.
That's amazing. I mean, that's such great resources and ideas for people who are listening. I think for me, when I recognize I'm starting to go down that rabbit hole of becoming too busy, it's reminding myself that I can say no to things. And because I'm a great one for saying yes to things, because I like saying yes to things, and I like my work and all of that sort of thing. And my husband always says availability isn't a skill, Susanne. So I have to I have to remind myself of that sometimes. And that it's
Can you say available?
availability is not a skill.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
God. I love
I'm not
it.
sure it's one of his originals. He has some corkers. He may have got that from somebody else. But I remind myself of that every now and again, because my natural response, if somebody messages me or says, "Can we get together?" or "Can I pick your brains for 5 minutes?" or that one as well. And my natural response is to go, "Yeah, sure." And I have to remind myself, no, I manage my own diary, and I do have some horrific days in it, like the ones I described to you, but they're an exception rather than the rule. And I think it's about reminding myself of that when my diary starts to look really mad and I can feel myself starting to get a bit stressed by it. Is right, okay, I'm going to say no to some stuff, and I block out time in my diary actually, um all the time, half a day or a day a week, and I don't put anything in, and I write it in my own diary so that I don't start writing stuff into it, and I only change that if I absolutely have to. And I have to be quite strict with myself, because I know my natural response is to keep saying yes to things. My dad calls it over enthusiastic volunteering, and I think that's exactly it. Reckless volunteering, that's me. So, and I know that about myself, so I have to keep a lid on it, keep a tight rein on it, because that I can easily get out of control and my diary gets ridiculous. So I think it's coming back to that self-awareness and self-knowledge. I know that about myself, so I have to make sure I've got the structures in place to make that happen.
Which reminds me of the word that didn't come into this conversation at all, really, which is boundaries. And I think setting boundaries is so important. And whenever I have a friend or a client or anyone starting a new job, I always say, start as you mean to go on. Like, work from the beginning the way that you really want to work. Don't put in extra hours to look like you're great at the beginning, because it's so hard to stop that when you've made yourself so available. And I was very strict with boundaries. Like, even the head of HR in my last organization would say, your boundaries are so visible as well to us. We know what to expect. Because when I took leave, I did not answer my phone. I did not read emails. But I told everyone. Of course, everyone else said that too, but they always did. And once you let that go, we all push boundaries, because we learn that as kids to push boundaries. So we do it forever with people. And you're the only one that can set your boundaries. And I always find people respect them once they know they're there.
It's exactly what you were saying earlier about that clarity of expectation. I think we need to be really open about that. If we don't work on Fridays, we don't work on Fridays, and you won't get anything out of us. If we have an out of office on our emails, you don't respond to emails, because the minute you start responding to them, people think, oh, well, she's on holiday, but she's just responded to me, so I'm going to keep going. And you're right. And I think when you run your own business, as we all do, you have to be even better at that, because it's so easy to say to yourself, oh, well, I can't switch off because I run my own business. I hear that all the time. I never switch off because I run my own business. Well, at some point you're going to collapse, because you can't be on all the time. Do you, when you're awake?
Emails.
Yes.
I took my emails and LinkedIn app off my phone just before Christmas, when I was going on. I had 3 weeks off, like you that time, Susanne, and I haven't put them back on.
Oh.
And I'm really proud of that. I mean, some days I'm a bit annoyed, but mostly it's like I don't need to carry that around with me and be checking it outside of when I'm sitting in front of my computer. So things will wait.
Love that. Are you the same, David? Do you have boundaries like that in place for yourself when you're on vacation? Are you off? Do you switch off?
Um, I check in, but I'm really like super conscious, maybe even over conscious about self-care. So I do like that oscillation I talked about earlier. I do like mini recoveries throughout the day. So um that's kind of more my style. I also have never done email on my phone to keep it like to have that boundary. And it was a long time before I even did text. It's like I just didn't want that intrusion. But I find that it does make life easier. So I do text, but I keep email off my phone.
Wow. I need to try this. My next holiday, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn it off. So
Well, I
before,
always took do it on holiday. Sorry, I always took the email and LinkedIn off before going on holidays, but now I've just not put them back.
wow, I have taken LinkedIn off of my phone because I found when I was struggling to switch off over Christmas, I kept looking at LinkedIn. So I did take that off. I mean, why? Why do you look at LinkedIn all the time?
It's a habit. It's a
What do you
habit.
think is going to happen? Anyway, so before we finish then, I wanted to ask you whether there's there's a reason for burnout. So is it our body or our mind expressing a desire for us to change or to create change in our life? So based on your own experiences, did you learn anything from it? Have you changed practice as a result? Susan, I'll throw to you first.
Yes, but it took me a long time. It wasn't. There was a few more near
Near misses.
incidents, near misses, and even still at times I can, like you were describing, I can feel that coming back. Um, I suppose, I don't know any different now, do I, either? What would have happened if I had stayed on the path that I was on? Well, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here now. Whether I would be alive or not, who knows? But I would say, in a one way, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And, but it was a big price to pay. So there was a big cost to it that I just don't think, we talk about people who help other people. And even at work or whatever, anyone who's in that, you want to help other people. You don't want them to make the same mistakes that you made and all of that. However, there's learning in our mistakes. It's how we get through life. I wouldn't wish what I went through that time on anyone, even the people that I really did not like working with, uh, because it's just not a nice thing to go through. But I think we all have our own path that we follow and our decisions that we make. And if we're not making the decisions that are best for us and our body, then our body will take decisive action for us. And so if you can learn to listen as young as possible, then you're miles ahead of some of us here still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think it's the process of burnout is unpleasant and you don't want to experience it. So actually the learning is to stop it before it gets to that point by noticing. What about you, David? Anything to add?
Man, I love that your body will take decisive action. That's so well said. Yeah, the analogy that I think about is with the alarm um on your phone that gets louder and louder. Um, I think about that. If we don't pay attention to the early signs, the body will be louder and louder in letting us know. Um, I guess I guess just two things I want to say related to that. So back to the mind-body connection is why not learn how to help your body support your mind versus not taking care of yourself so your body is sabotaging what you're trying to accomplish. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention, and I can't remember, I've got it on my notes here, which one of you were saying something that made me think about our good old friend David White when he tells a story about how he had burnt out as the executive director at a nonprofit. And the night, that evening of that epiphany, like, I can't do this anymore, he got together with Brother David Steindl-Rast, a Benedictine monk who was sort of like a mentor to David White. And when David White asked him, Brother David, speak to me of exhaustion, Brother David says the antidote to exhaustion is wholeheartedness. And David White was surprised. I remember hearing the first time I heard the story, surprised, because I'm thinking the antidote to exhaustion is recovery, obviously. But then David White went on to talk about, like, you're burnt out in this profession because your heart's not in it. And you've known for a long time your heart's been in poetry, and it's time to acknowledge that and move in the direction that you're being called to. And then I know, Susie, you know the wonderful Rilke poem, The Swan, where then Brother David, do you know that one too, Suzanne?
I know, I haven't heard it.
Oh, okay. And then Brother David Steindl-Rast reads Rilke's poem, The Swan, and the image that it depicts is the swan clumsily trundling across a lawn, looking like super awkward. But the moment it sets itself into the water, it becomes this regal creature because it's in the environment that it's supposed to be in. And there's a wonderful line where it says something like, the swan is pleased to be carried. And I love that because it was passive. It allowed itself to be carried by this current in this ecosystem that it was made to be in. It didn't have to like paddle like crazy. And it's like, when we put ourselves in an ecosystem that allows us to thrive, we thrive. And so that's such an important part of the leaving burnout into thriving.
I love that. I need to look that one up. I've got David White's book on your recommendation, David. It's just wonderful. I think, we were talking earlier about resources and books we can recommend, but his meditations are just fantastic to read. Any other books, resources that you would recommend, David? You've recommended Your Body Keeps the Score, which is a truly amazing book. Any others that you would recommend?
Yeah, actually, I'm only like about a quarter of the way in, but oh, is it awesome? Is The Art of Impossible by Stephen Kotler. Yeah, so he spent 25 years now being engaged in and studying elite extreme athletes like big wave surfers, etc., and what they do physically and mentally to perform at such an elite level. And since I know all three of us love science and good stories, he has the combo there. It is stellar.
I thought you were going to say the three of us are elite athletes for a minute, and I was about to fall off my chair laughing.
I love it. That's awesome.
But yes, we love the science. I'll take it. I'm that's fine. Thank you for those. I always leave our conversations with more books to read. Susan, have you got any other resources or books you want to add?
So earlier on, David, you talked about the work of Tony Schwartz and Jim Lohr, and that book, The Power of Full Engagement, is a great book. And for a lot of what we've talked about today, I think they go through that in that book. And then the other one for me, it's funny because you talked about the art of possibilities or something.
Impossible.
Impossible. Well, it's the art of possibility by the Zanders for
I
me.
love that book.
And the reason it is because what you were talking about, the wholeheartedness, David, and I was saying, look for the twinkle in your eye, and he talks about shining eyes, seek out those shining eyes. And I think when there's something that makes our eyes shine or sparkle, twinkle, whatever the word is, there's a message there for you. Go follow that. That's the key to wholeheartedness. And when your eyes are dull and everything's dull, then time to move on.
Very good. I think one that I've been dipping in and out of for a couple of years, actually, it's called Conscious Creativity by Philippa Stanton. And that's a lovely book about being more creative in everyday life. And so she offers guided things to do around different themes. So you can go out and you look for loads of things that are the same colour, and then you arrange them on a table and you take a photograph of them. So that's a book that I dip into when perhaps I am feeling a bit too much in my head and not enough out in the world, that wholeheartedness. And I find that's really good. And it's things to do when you're out on a walk, or things to do if you're out in nature. So I find that really good. And I've just started reading, on your recommendation, David, Wonderful by David Pearl. That's something that I'm reading. I think that was one of yours. And
No, actually not. No.
was it you,
Mine.
Susan?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm reading that, and I think that's an interesting one as well. I think around just taking yourself off in a different direction, and doing that kind of getting outside notion, wandering about. I'm finding that very insightful. So that's a good one.
Yeah, I think it's great to go out with a question and look for things outside that you just, you would never really, you we think the answer is sitting in one place. It's not.
Really isn't. No,
really
get out,
isn't.
get out the office, go and do something else. Thank you both.
Availability is not a skill.
It's not a skill. No, really is not. Take that one with you. It's been great talking to both of you, as ever. Thank you for all of your insights. Thank you too for sharing your personal experiences of burnout. I think I found it really interesting to listen to, very moving, and I think other people listening will too. I really hope this speaks to people and helps some people recognise how they're feeling at the moment and get some help if they need it. So thank you both, as ever.
Well, this is what puts the shine and sparkle in my eyes. So
good.
It's great to have these conversations with you both. I love them.
Me too. Me too. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Change Stories podcast. I love this conversation, and I hope you did too. Thanks as ever to my wonderful guests and to Pete Morgan at Monkey Pants Productions for making the podcast sound amazing. If you want to find out more about this or any other episodes of Change Stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk, where you will find all the episodes and show notes. If you have enjoyed listening, please rate and review the Change Stories podcast on your podcast listening platform. And do please let me know if you have ideas or requests for future episodes. You can contact me and find out more about change and storytelling on my website, www.feldsparconsulting.com. Thanks again for joining in with the Change Stories conversation.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.